This is the latter stage of my flight from Queenstown to Wellington. I'm just turning onto the sort of base leg for the ILS approach onto runway 16. It's early evening and it's night time in Wellington, and the flight has been for about 45 to 50 minutes, and it's a really lovely flight because it takes you take off from Wellington, from Queenstown, and climb up out of the mountains, and then you fly up along the sort of central spine of South Island, which takes you past Mount Cook and all the mountains down that way. So fairly shortly we're currently at 3,000 feet, and we'll be turning onto the ILS on runway 16. That was the autopilot just coming off, a little bit of a bump there just as I trimmed the aircraft out to stay level at about 3,000 feet. So this is Papa Del Charlie 172. It's based on the BAE 146 aircraft, a lovely little 4-engine short-haul jet. It has a range of about 1,200 miles, so it does takes you good distance at a good speed, but you're not flying for too long. So while we're turning on to finals, you can see Wellington just down there. Should pick out the runway fairly shortly. This is an instant replay, by the way. That's why there's nobody sitting in the seats at the moment. So this is Upper Hutt here, and you can see the flashing light straight ahead. Looks on the little peninsula, which is Wellington Airport. Wellington is the capital of New Zealand, for those of you that don't know it, and it's based at the southern end of the North Island. So this is Papa Del Charlie 172. I've got two Cytec radio quadrants, throttle quadrants, two Cytec throttle quadrants with a Cytec yoke, and then I've got three monitors, standard computer monitors for flight instruments, engine instruments and navigation. I also use VATSIM to talk to virtual air traffic controllers, which is really good. They're a really professional bunch of people. And then coming up over the top, I've got my overhead panel. Unfortunately at the moment not very many of these switches actually work because I'm having trouble trying to interface the switches with the flight simulator, but I've contacted Just Flight and I'm hoping that they'll give me a solution to that. Okay, so let's see. We're currently 2,400 feet on descent for the ILS. Slightly to the left of track and slightly below the glide slope. So what we'll do is we'll just watch our approach in here. Got 7.5 miles to run. Lovely clear evening in Wellington. The main business centre of Wellington is down in amongst those lights, plus the harbour. The New Zealand government sits in the Parliament building called the Beehive. Called the Beehive because it actually does look like a beehive. So it's not a particularly big city, but it's also known as the Windy City because quite often coming into Wellington Airport, you have pilots have pretty strong winds to contend with. It's also known as Wellywood because this is where Peter Jackson, the director, is based, with his company Wetterworks, and you probably know him from films like the Lord of the Rings series, and of course he's done quite a lot of other works as well. I'm not too familiar with that there. Okay, so just 4.5 miles to go, and we're nicely on the localizer, slightly below the glide slope at the moment, but visibility is really good. We've got 3 greens and flaps are fully down. Speed is 130 knots, passing through 1,000 feet, rate of descent 700 feet per minute. Everything looking nice and steady. You know whether you're making a good approach or not, because if the runway looks as though it's pretty stationary in the cockpit windscreen, then you know that you're making a good approach. But if it's moving around all over the place, then you know that you just haven't got control of it. You can probably see on the runway that there's what looks like a pair of red lights and white lights, and basically there's 2 rows on either side, made up of 4 lights, and what you really want to see all the way in is 2 red lights and 2 white lights on either side, which is exactly what we've got this evening. So making a good approach, making the last sort of final adjustments to line up exactly with the runway, nicely on the glide slope and on the localizer. On a final last 100 feet, couple of 100 feet. So we're coming over the runway now, starting to bring the throttles back and flaring the aircraft onto the runway. So a speed brake coming out and applying brakes. So reducing speed quite rapidly. The BAE 146 has a really good short takeoff and landing capability, so we don't need to use the full length of the runway. And there we go, turning off the runway. Into Wellington Airport. And we'll end it there, because the only other thing I'm doing is taxiing to the gate.